Welcome to the Dr. Warren Gage podcast. Disney's new remake of Snow White isn't just a box office flop. It's a symbol of Disney's modern decline. So how did Disney lose its magic? Dr. Warren Gage points out that Disney has rejected what made these beloved stories timeless in the first place. Fairy tales like Snow White have captured our hearts for generations because they ultimately point us to a love story that is truth and not fiction, the gospel story of Jesus' love for us. If you're interested in diving deeper, be sure to check out Dr. Gage's book, The Romance of Redemption, which we've linked to in the show notes. The introduction goes into detail about how fairy tales ultimately gesture toward gospel truth. Thanks for joining us today.
Recently, the Disney company released an updated version of Snow White, and it was not well received. And there have been a number of comments about Disney movies lately that have remarked about how they've lost the magic. To lose the magic of the Magic Kingdom, that's a pretty big deal. And so the question is why? Why have they lost the magic? And I think that there's a reason that we can understand why that's the case. Walt Disney, the original company, dealt with Snow White, with Cinderella, with Sleeping Beauty, with these fairy tales in animated form. And they are some of the most popular movies of all time in virtually every culture and language into which they've been translated. And so why is that the case? And so let's begin with Snow White and consider why that theme, that story, is so perennially popular. And what did Disney do? And that is they departed from the story itself and the way that it was written and the reason behind it. And that is that these fairy tales all have in common the idea they begin with once upon a time and they end with happily ever after. It's a typical trajectory of what we call comedy. The genre is comedy. And it begins usually in a situation where there's some desperation, and then it has a climax. There's usually something that rescues someone, and then they live together and are happily ever after. So what is that narrative, and why is that so popular? With Snow White, the story of Snow White is really quite remarkable. The traditional story, the ones collected by the brothers Grimm, were folk tales, and they were well known. Snow White began with her mother, who was sitting on the palace's windowsill and it was snowing, and she was sewing at the windowsill, watching the snow fall, and she pricked her finger, and some of the blood, a few drops, spilled on the snow. And she was hoping for a daughter, and she was wanting a daughter, and she said, if I have a daughter, I want to name her Snow White. And she saw the scarlet blood against the white snow, and she said, I want her to have cheeks as red as a rose, and her skin will be white as snow. And so that was the wish of her heart. So she, in fact, became pregnant and was going to have a baby. And she had a little girl, and she named her Snow White. But sadly, the queen died in childbirth. And so the king married a beautiful second wife, stepmother to Snow White. She was very beautiful, but she was very jealous, very, very selfish and proud. And so she immediately tried to have Snow White taken into the mountains and killed by a woodsman. But she was so beautiful, the little girl, that he couldn't do that. And so he dropped her off with 7 dwarves that lived in the magic forest. And so Snow White was raised in the forest by these dwarves. And upon a day, the vain queen, who had a magic mirror that reassured her every day that she was the most beautiful in the land, There came a day when the mirror told her that she was no longer the most beautiful in the land, but the fairest in the land was Snow White. And the queen then immediately recognized that her plan to be rid of Snow White had failed. And so the story went that she determined that she had to take Snow White's life. So she dresses up as an old hag. And the brilliance of the fairy tales is that her heart is really evil, even though her appearance outwardly is very beautiful. And so when she disguises herself as an old witch in a haggish appearance, she's actually becoming what she is inwardly, outwardly. So the disguise is really the revelation of what is truly in her heart, this evil, wicked woman. And so she poisons an apple. It was done very dramatically in Disney's animated version. She takes a beautiful apple and a luscious scarlet fruit and dips it in this poison. And she takes a small basket of apples and offers them to Snow White. And she implores her to just to take a bite and taste it. And so Snow White does. And in fact, and so she falls into a death-like sleep. And so the wicked queen thinks that she has triumphed, but she is ultimately destroyed because of her wickedness. But Snow White is in every appearance of death. She seems to be dead, but she's so beautiful that the dwarves can't bury her, and so they put her in a crystal coffin. And one day, her prince comes, who can see her beauty still, and the prince kisses Snow White and awakens her to new life. And then he, because he's a prince, he takes her away to the clouds, to the palace of his father, where the couple then are happily ever after. Now that beautiful story, famous story, the magic of that famous story that the modern Disney has lost is because that story is a retelling of the gospel. The gospel of the New Testament, the gospel of Christ. And Snow White represents mankind. Actually, all of us that God has created, he made us for beauty, and beauty that's both inward and outward. But we were lured by the serpent and by evil to partake of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, which had been forbidden to us. And in taking that bite of that fruit, we fell into sin and death, under the power of sin and death. And that brings us into a position where we can no longer fulfill what God's highest purposes for us were. And we find ourselves helpless, slaves of sin and death. But there is a Son of God who is a royal prince who comes along, and one day he will awaken us from that death-like slumber and raise us to new life and embrace us and take us to be with him to the city that he has prepared for us, which is part of the palace of the king, and we will then be happily ever after with him. So that the fairy tale is more than a fairy tale. It's the story that respects, it resonates with the deepest longing of the heart of all of us, the heart to be loved, to love and to be loved of God himself, who promises us a royal and a wonderful destiny. The same story is seen also in Cinderella, which is another one of Disney's magical animated movies. Cinderella is, in fact, sociologists tell us, and people that study other cultures, that's the most popular story in all the world. And ethnologists have told us that wherever they discover a new culture, somewhere in the sagas and the lore and in the myths of that particular culture, as remote as it might have been from the general stream of mankind, there is the story of someone that recapitulates the story of Cinderella. Well, what is that story? The story of Cinderella is once again this beautiful young girl, maiden, is a part of a step family, and her stepmother and two stepsisters are very jealous of her beauty. And so that they're not compared to her beauty. They put her to work as the scullery maid. She cleans out the chimney. So Cinderella's beauty is marred by ashes. She's covered in ashes and soot, and nobody can see behind that she really is quite a beauty. And so it happens that along the way, the king of the country wants to find a bride for his son. And so in order to find the bride, he will have a great ball, and all of the fair maidens throughout the whole land will be invited to come to the ball. And the prince then will dance with them to see if one of them will steal his heart away. Well, Cinderella watches her sisters prepare, her stepmother, to go to the ball, but she has no prospect, no hope. There's no gown, there's no way of conveyance, there's nothing that would enable her to go. She's left out completely. And so what happens is there's an intervention of magic with a good fairy that comes. There's always, it seems like, the intervention of some supernatural in comedy. The formal name for that is Deus Ex Machina. It's some kind of supernatural power that is at work. And so what happens is the good fairy then comes, and we all know the story. Cinderella is given a coach made out of a pumpkin. Field mice become the stallions that will pull the coach, and she's given a beautiful gown that's fitting for the occasion, and glass slippers. And so she is able to go to the ball, but she's warned she has to leave by midnight or the magic spell will end. And so that we're reminded that everything is magical here. And so she dances with the prince, and the prince falls totally in love with her. He will have no one else. But at the stroke of midnight, she's rushing out the way, and although she escapes without being detected, she leaves behind a glass slipper, and that's all that remains to the prince by which he can remember her. And so the prince has to undertake a great journey. We see that often in folk literature. The hero has to undertake a long quest. He goes throughout the kingdom, length and breadth of the kingdom, with this glass slipper, trying to find the fair young maiden whose foot will slip into the slipper. And no one is able to accomplish that. He goes to the ends of the kingdom. The last house he comes to is the house of Cinderella's and her stepsisters. The stepsisters struggle mightily to try to make their foot fit, but it doesn't. And so in despair, he asks, is there anyone else? And the only other one that can come out to tempt the shoe that it will fit her is Cinderella. And she comes out in all of her cinders and soot, but the prince who sees her can see through all of that. He sees her inherent beauty. She slips her foot into the slipper. She's identified, and the prince sees her through all of the dust and ashes, and so he takes her with him again to the palace of the king. And they live happily ever after. The magic of that story, the magic that the modern Disney has forgotten, is that too is a retelling of the gospel. Why is it charming for children and for adults alike, for every nation, and everybody is longing for something that wonderful story tells us? And why is that? What is the magic that causes it to be so popular in all the world? And again, it's a retelling of the gospel, which God, I think, has put into the hearts of all of us, longing to love and to be loved. Even when we think of ourselves as being unworthy of loving, when we can't see past our faults and our deformities, but we believe that perhaps there is someone who can and who can love us in spite of all of that, who can see all of our faults and love us anyway. And so the story retells the gospel in that our first mother, Eve, like Snow White, partook of a fruit that brought death and disfigured us. The image of God was not obliterated, but it was marred in all of us. And Isaiah the prophet says that we are like those who are covered with ashes and soot. He uses that very language, and he said, but God is going to come who is going to give us beauty for ashes. In the Hebrew, it's beautiful. It's fair for afer, beauty for ashes. There is a beauty that is behind all of the things that disfigure and diminish our beauty. And so we, too, await our Prince to come. And when he comes, he sees through that. He identifies us, he restores our beauty, and takes us away to be with his Father in the palace, the throne room of heaven, where our wedding will take place. That magic is inherent in the nature of the Cinderella story. It's a retelling of the gospel, of the hope that is embedded in all of us. And then to see that that's the case in general, there is also the story of Sleeping Beauty. Sleeping Beauty was a princess, and she lived in a palace, but the fairies were going to have a party to celebrate her birth, and so they invited all of the fairies except one who was discordant, and so one fairy wasn't invited, and so she became very upset with that. And so while all the fairies were blessing Sleeping Beauty, she put a curse upon her, and she said that by her 16th birthday, when she would be eligible for marriage, she would prick her finger on a spinning wheel and she would fall into a death-like trance, and the whole palace would be turned to stone. And indeed, that is what happens on her 16th birthday. As she's anticipating her marriage, she pricks her finger and she falls into a death-like sleep and turns to stone, and the father and the queen, the king and the queen, and all the court, and everybody, animals included, everybody turns to stone. And then over the stone there grows a great rose bush and covers it with thorns. But Sleeping Beauty had dreamed of her prince that was to come. One day my prince will come, she sings. And so one day he does come. And in order to find her, he hacks his way through the thorns. We see the gospel in that. We should be able to see the gospel in that. The one who went through the tortures of Calvary on our behalf, who himself was crowned with thorns in order that we might be crowned with a diadem of glory. And so her prince came and hacked his way through the thorns and saw her and awakened her to life and kissed her, and the whole palace came to life again and was restored to the loveliness that it had once had. So we see these themes of the restoration of innocence and beauty and love, and all of the things that want to hinder that from happening, being disabled and their power taken from them, and things being put right like they were intended to be. All of that, all of these magical stories, the magic really of Disney was the gospel that was inherent in all of these stories that are so popular, because they touch the deepest longing of the human heart. We want to be loved of God. We want to be forgiven of sin and delivered from all the things that mar us in this life, we're told, and we experience. Life, beauty is fleeting. And so we long for another world. In this world, we have beauty and youth, but then it is soon gone, not to return. You only drink from that cup once, it's said. But in heaven, it's exactly the opposite, because Christ is presenting to himself, Paul tells us, a bride without spot or wrinkle. We will be perfect in that day, and without spot or wrinkle. That's the evidence of the aging process. In heaven, that process works in reverse, and we are made more beautiful. We're more conformed to the image of Christ himself. And because he is perfection and because he's infinite, we will never exhaust the source of that beauty. So heaven is dynamic. We're always ever increasing in beauty, and he in love for us, and we in love for him. And that's the secret, that's the magic of heaven. It is always more and always greater and never coming to a place of exhaustion, because we are always finite creatures, and he is the one who loves us is infinite. And we will always be learning more and more of his glory and beauty, and reflecting that image and becoming more and more like him as we go through time. So the magic of the fairy tale has within it the gospel account. And the whole Bible, really, from that perspective, as Paul certainly understood and as John did, who called Jesus the bridegroom, the Baptist who called Jesus the bridegroom, and John, the son of Zebedee, who writes the Apocalypse, who describes the heavenly bridegroom coming down in chapter 1 of the Gospel, coming down and taking on flesh and dwelling among us. And then the twofold invitation to come to him as he speaks to his first disciples. Come, and then the one who hears says, come. And then at the end of Revelation, the bride herself comes down from heaven, and the Spirit and the bride say, come, and the one who hears is to come. Anyone who is thirsty, anyone who is longing for this kind of love. So John has made his great work, his great enterprise, which is the literary bifid, the two books together that constitute one work, the Gospel of John and the Revelation. He's enveloped them in that romance, introducing the bridegroom in chapter 1 of the Gospel and the bride in chapters 21 and 22 of Revelation, which makes of them a great heavenly romance. And again, that's the glorious magic of the gospel, the romantic heart of God who sees beyond all of our faults and loves us anyway. He knows all of our sin and has paid the price of our purity and our restoration, and he loves us anyway. That's the magic that is inherent in the gospel, that has never been lost by the gospel, and is always attractive to men and women all over the world, whether children to aged, to the elderly. That gospel is a glorious retelling of the ultimate romance that God has placed in all of our hearts. I wrote a book about this some years ago called The Romance of Redemption here. It's your story as the bride of Christ. And the thought was that if all of the prophets, priests and kings and patriarchs are types of Christ, then the accounts of their wives, which are quite robust, we get to know something about the character of these women, of Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel and Leah, of Ruth, and Zipporah, of Eve, of all of these women. Were able to see them. And if their husbands, the prophets, priests, and kings, are types of Christ, then it only stands to reason that the accounts of the women of the Bible would anticipate the bride of Christ, that is, the people of God, all of us. As a community, we constitute the city of God, which is feminine, which is the feminine concept, the mater polis, the mother city, the metropolis. The city, the community of mankind is always regarded as being feminine. And so it is Christ who is the infinite God-man. He had to become flesh because our debt of sin demanded death. We had to offer a bloody death as the payment for our sin, which was a just punishment for our sin. And only a man, not a God, but only a man could make that mortal payment of our bloody death on our account. But the value of that death had to be infinite to be applied to an indefinite number of multiple billions of people that would express faith toward God and hope in God, and that would be the subjects of his redemption and restoration. And so the only one who could offer that kind of a sacrifice to pay a bloody death, but that death would have infinite value, is the God-man, Christ Jesus, who the kingdom of heaven, Jesus said, was like a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. Matthew 22:2. And so Jesus himself is giving us warrant by pointing out that particular genre of the hero story who wins a great battle. He slays the beast, he slays the dragon, and the reward that is given to him is a bride. And so we become that bride. We are the beneficiaries of his triumph over the serpent, over the great enemy, the great red dragon. All of these themes that inform the stories of the great stories of all the earth are really derivative of the grand story of the Bible, which is precisely that. The kingdom of heaven is like a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. He wants to give that wedding feast, and he will. And his son, in order to merit the bride, is the one who then suffers at great expense his own personal death, but then the Father raises him from death. And then the pledge that he has is that he then will raise us from death. When we leave, the only thing we leave in the grave is going to be our sin. And we'll be completely remade and made worthy of Christ himself. The prospect, the hope that entails is unbelievable. That we will be made worthy of standing at the side of the Son of David, of the royal bride of the tribe of Judah, the Melchizedekian priest. Psalm 45 was written for the Son of David when he would take a bride, and that story becomes our story. The Song of Songs, the Song of Solomon, the longing of Solomon's wise old heart was for this kind of a romance, and so he immortalized it in that fantastic poetic duet of the love between Solomon and Shulamit, the feminine form of the name Solomon, in the Song of Songs. And that theme of the longing of the bride, the prince that comes and rescues and restores her, can be our story if we have faith in that grand story and believe that God has given us the favor of having chosen us to be the bride of Christ himself. And although there is no beauty in us now, the son who could have had a fairer bride with the wish of his heart was faithful to the choice of his Father. That is, that we are the ones who have been given the great privilege of, when our purity and our beauty is restored, we will be a worthy companion of the very Son of God. The magic of that story is the magic of the gospel, and that is perennial. That can never be lost. It is inherent in the nature of the way that God has made us, and that is the hope that the believer has, and it's a wonderful hope. That hope that our days will end and we will be with him forever in heaven, and that we will live happily then ever after.
Thank you for listening to the Dr. Warren Gage podcast. If you enjoyed this message, please be sure to like and subscribe to one of our channels so that you never miss an episode. We'd appreciate it if you could also leave us a review. You can find us on drwarrengage.com, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. To support the podcast and gain access to exclusive offers and content from Dr. Warren Gage, please visit our Patreon account at patreon.com/Dr. Warren Gage. We hope you join us next time on the Dr. Warren Gage podcast.